Okay. Hello and welcome to episode 3, series 1 of our UKRG short conversations. We are recording on the morning of Friday, 15th of May. Today we have gathered in alphabetical order Ben Adams from Constantine, Ivan Bailey from Martinspeed, Stuart Brown from Momart. Unfortunately, we received apologies from Victor Curier at Gander and White, David Preston from Crown Fine Art, and Dave Williams from MTec. Thank you very much, everybody. So all have agreed to field some of our questions on the current transport landscape, especially in light of the most recent government guidelines published earlier this week. As usual, we'll try to move along fairly briskly if we can. So I'll go straight to the first question if everybody is ready. And Stuart has very kindly volunteered to kick off with this one. So what issues are you expecting with regard to airport operations and for other shipments moving internationally?
Well, it's morning. It's been a good, interesting week actually, and last week trying to get information out from the airlines and watching how it's developed. Heathrow has remained operational throughout everything. A lot of the airline handling agents shrink their operations, so where they may have had 6 cargo sheds servicing 21 airlines to begin with, they shrunk all of that into one cargo building as the lockdown was happening. That's beginning to, this past week, that's beginning to open back up. So the airlines are moving back into their own cargo sheds. Still a very busy environment. The problem at the moment is their understanding and preparedness for the next stage. And speaking to some of them, they are writing their procedures, which includes their procedures for visitors, which therefore includes their procedures for us and supervisions. Those procedures, the people I've spoken to, shouldn't change too much in regards to what we do, just the levels of PPE that we require and the people around us will be required. The unfortunate news, some that I have spoken to have said that initially they will only allow pass holders, BAA pass holders into their buildings, which knocks couriers out. At the moment, that's at the moment. We are obviously, it's a changing situation every day for us and around the world. So the good news is those that I have spoken to don't see the procedures changing too much. What is going to change is time. Things are going to take longer at the airport. Certainly at the moment they have a huge amount of freight backlog that they need to shift. So time's going to be one thing. Capacity on the aircraft is going to be the other thing as well. And it may mean that for certain shipments going forward, there'll be the need for more dedicated pallets, sole use units for air freight rather than mixed cargo, because the relationships we've always had and the favours we've always been able to ask and pull off in the cargo sheds may not be possible anymore because of capacity. But as I say, the good news is that it's opening back up. We just need to watch this space very carefully, certainly with the international shipments. With regards to the other airports, there's various airports across the States are open and operational, very similar to the UK. They're allowing badged personnel into their cargo buildings. They're not allowing visitors, unbadged, so non-pass holders, into their cargo buildings. Luxembourg and Liège are working operationally as they did do before, with access for personnel, couriers, no problem at the moment. So things are opening up at Heathrow, which is good news. We just need to watch the space and have conversations with the people we've got relationships with, and hoping that those people we built these relationships with for many years are still going to be in situ when we return, because otherwise we'll be faced with having to build new relationships and make the people understand the procedures and processes that we need to mitigate the risk of the artwork. And that's what we all do, and that's what we've always done, is mitigated the risk of the artwork. Now we just need to throw on top of that mitigating the risk of the people around the artwork as well against this virus.
What's the what would be people's interpretation, I suppose, of how quickly the airlines and the handling teams are getting back up to capacity, and how long do you think there is going to be volatility over the freight capacity and costs?
Hi guys, it's David Preston. I was down at the airport last week, actually on Friday, just doing a supervision, and the queue was around the block to try and get into the cargo terminal. We had an appointment. It still was very challenging to get in. We managed to get in, and there was further delays because, I mean, it's very clear that the crew are still working. They're very stressed. They've been working really hard over this period, obviously with furlough for colleagues. In fact, there wasn't an X-ray operator in the building on that particular day, so there was a big backlog of freight which was waiting for the next shift to take over. So I think Stuart makes a good point that, you know, the airlines are starting to come back now, and we will see a push to try and go back to normal as best possible, but there will be inevitable delays with backlogs to be cleared, changing procedures. I mean, it was very clear that when I was in the cargo terminal, there was a real lack of, in my view, PPE. And, you know, that's not an environment that we want our people to go into, let alone couriers. You know, we've all got families and the general population to look after. So, yeah, I think Stuart probably covers everything there. I think he makes a really good point.
Yeah, similarly, David, you know, just we had our transport general manager went out to fly Eurotunnel a couple of weeks ago, and with all the extra screening and checks that they've got in place, they're operating at about 50% capacity. They have social distancing on the minibus transfer that goes from the carriage to the catering carriage. When you're in the catering carriage, you have to be put against the wall almost. You're not allowed to sit airline seats anymore. So the whole operation is operating at 50% less capacity. So it'll be a slow and gradual return in whatever way that they do, just because of the procedures that they're being asked to work under at the moment, the same as everybody else. But that's understandable. Yeah, but Stuart and Dave both make really good points about the airlines.
Is it everybody's understanding that licensing, export licensing, is still shut down at the moment?
We found that it's been closed, and we haven't been able to get any licenses. We've been sending trucks into Europe to our depots in Belgium and to Liège airport during the lockdown, but getting any export licenses, the people who are issuing the licenses, they're actually saying they can't issue licenses from working from home. They have to be in the office. So we haven't been able to find any information from them when they're going to be back working again from our side. So, you know, that is an issue that is going to have to be addressed in the coming weeks, I think.
Sorry, I'll just follow up with the tunnel, if I may. Sorry, Ivan. I was just wondering as well. So, there's been quite a lot of talk this week about the possibility of quarantining crews as well, or freight drivers, and whether freight drivers are exempt. What is everybody's understanding? Well, Ivan, starting with you, what's your understanding of the possible exemptions for freight drivers on all routes or particular routes?
I think it's really where, you know, the background of where that crew's come from, and the best practice really with the risk assessments first off. So if you're running a good system with the crews and warehouses within this country, our plan is to keep people together as much as possible, rather than separating crews, same vehicles. I know some of you operate like that already, but we're kind of making it a policy to keep crews together in the same vehicles. They look after the vehicles and clean everything. We have sent crews out, and so far we've only looked at quarantining people when they come back if there are any signs, coughs, temperatures or anything like that. But so far I haven't come across any kind of request for quarantining from our private clients, especially working on site, other than PPE and common sense, whether they'll be at the same venue or not. So no, I don't know whether anybody else has come across any people asking you to quarantine things. But one thing I do find interesting is whether we start quarantine areas within our warehouses and how this will work. And also whether that's a bit of a paradox, because I'm sure we've all had Amazon deliveries over the last 8 weeks and food deliveries. Are we quarantining those? Do we need to quarantine cases that are in storage that come out? It's all really to do with close contact and how that's done. And again, that's down to PPE and best kind of practice within warehouses, wearing masks near cases that are going out, or asking crews that come in, external carriers. We've got PDFs and information that we send out to external carriers, asking them to, you know, follow certain procedures. And I'm sure you guys have the same things, asking carriers to do certain things, and clients that come into contact with our crews as well. You know, again, it's common sense.
Has anybody encountered any issues about elsewhere in Europe, for example, about 2 drivers, and whether that's been queried at any point?
We have actually been sending vehicles to Benelux and France. We had a truck in France yesterday, and we actually found no problem. Our crew were equipped with N95 FFP3 masks. Obviously, they were wearing them when they were working in the cab together, and when they're on the exterior of the vehicle, they were wearing nitrile gloves. They had personal hand sanitizer, which we provided for them, and the truck has its own central hand sanitizer. And we are issuing a company certificate every time a vehicle comes back into our depot. We've invested in a sanitized vaporizing unit, where every vehicle that comes back at the end of the day, or if it's been out in Europe and comes back, we sanitize the interior of the cab of the truck, and also we sanitize the interior of the cargo area. And basically similar, if you've seen on the media where you saw in China, they had operators going sanitizing the streets. We've managed to secure enough sanitizing fluid, and it's pressurized in a cylinder, and it runs similar to an airline. And when you can sanitize fabric, it's non-marking, non-invasive, but it just sanitizes the whole area, and it's a very quick and efficient way of actually covering all surfaces, something that you wouldn't be able to reach, say, by hand, you know, on a general clean. We've upped the cleaning in our offices also with that piece of kit, and you know, for a relatively cheap investment in that, I think it gives you a lot of coverage. And if anyone's interested, they can contact me, and I'll give them the details of where to buy that. But basically, you can get a month's supply and the equipment for under £1,000. And I think, you know, initially, obviously our cleaning staff that we have for the vehicles and our offices, you know, we've doubled the time that they spend cleaning different hard areas. But the beauty of this piece of kit, it actually cleans areas that you can't reach, as I said earlier. But also we're looking at an application to be able to, when we're looking at receiving cases into our warehouse, or we're going to be handing cases out to our partners, basically we can use this vaporizer on the outside of the case, because as it contacts the outer surface, the hard surfaces, it actually sanitizes. It's an instant sanitization of anything that would be on the case.
Since that's a question that came up yesterday actually in the American registrars group, and I was just thinking actually, since we're heading in that direction, are you aware of, or have you had discussions with other European agents about a consistency of approach about treatment of the cabs, treatment of the cargo areas, how the crates will be handled and so on across the board?
Generally, we've had some collections and deliveries during lockdown, and we've been operating our warehouses with a skeleton crew, and we've been keeping the other agents' vehicles that come up. We've produced an area that they can use for hand sanitizer using our facilities, you know, for any breaks they need and things like that. And we've been using that piece of kit to actually sanitize that area. And we've been talking to the other agents by telephone, seeing what mitigation they have in place, you know, and really we have been deciding what to do with the level of information we're receiving from other agents. You know, ideally from us, it's based on risk assessment. As I said, we have our own NEBOSH staff reviewing each risk assessment. And, you know, we look at the guidelines, how closely does it resemble the guidelines of the UK? Obviously, we've got facilities, our own facilities in Belgium and Venice being closed. However, you know, we see it's very similar, the guidelines across Europe, certainly. And most people are very conscious, and they're making a good effort to actually social distance and prevent any cross-contamination. You know, I think certainly the drivers that have turned up at the warehouse I'm based at, they have been very conscious and very professional in their attitude to that. It's quite heartening.
Somebody else was about to come in, I think, on that.
Sorry, it's David, Preston. Ivan and I both on a kind of a forum with the rest of the IcePack community. So we've got 75 countries involved there, and there's been some really good communication and quite positive communication about some of the processes they've got in place locally, which does give, well, both of us, I'm sure, a lot of confidence that it's being taken seriously elsewhere in Europe.
Can I just be clear about the, I suppose, on the consistency, but also about the Department for Transport guidelines? Are we pretty confident that freight drivers entering the UK are exempt from any requirement for a possible 2-week quarantine?
David, according to the FTA at the moment, and in the absence of a official quarantine policy from the government, the FTA are saying that at the moment they have been lobbying very well on all of our behalf. In fact, they've been doing a fantastic job, and they are saying that haulage drivers will be exempt from any form of quarantine, and then that does include drivers from the EU as well. At the moment, that's what they're saying. So, as with the Brexit situation, without wanting to bring that into the mix so early on, but the idea is that obviously road haulage transport has to keep moving. If that were to stop, then quite fundamentally the economy will be affected even worse than it is now. At the moment, that's what the FTA is saying, and I think we're all relatively reassured by that.
Can you foresee any particular issues around the presence of an onboard courier? That
would be the concern, because what Ivan was saying was absolutely right. I think that you know, we're all risk assessing as businesses. We're all being asked to do that. We're all looking at working in small teams, consistency, PPE, and everything else. I think if you are crossing the channel, theoretically, if you had an officer there, a police officer or anyone from authority who pulls the vehicle over and says, you know, can you give me some form of identification, how you set up, which company you're from, are you working in a team? Okay, you can follow all that back, and then they look at the courier in the back behind the perspex screen and say, sorry, who's that? So that kind of breaks you could imagine that theoretically that might break that area of consistency. Obviously, it depends on the person that you're speaking to at any given moment. It hasn't happened so far. You'd like to think it might not and wouldn't happen. There are obviously other methods of dealing with that, such as follow cars and everything else that we could get into further down the line. But yes, theoretically, it could be a concern.
Moving on to the next bit, and I'll roll these two questions together a bit. So, and I think we're partway down the road. So my question is, how soon do you think transport and handling teams, I suppose specifically for museums, can be recalled and operational? At what capacity? And what are your plans for dealing with the likely high demand for services come the autumn?
I mean, we're remaining, or have remained, partially operational throughout this, but our aim at the moment is spending the next 2 weeks be in preparedness for becoming more operational than we are from the beginning of June. That's the idea, that we'll bring a select number of guys off of furlough as demand requires. That's the cautious bit that we all need to be cautious about. it's the demand. I mean, you've spoken there about this peak into autumn. Speaking to institutions and lenders, I agree. There will be this peak. There'll be the peak of what we're calling the repatriation. Everything that's in the wrong place. So that's what we're seeing in conversations throughout latter June and into July. The next peak beyond that depends on you guys. It depends on the institutions, how your programs shape up into the autumn season. But as I say, we're getting prepared over this next 2-week period to be more operational than we have been from the beginning of June. To what scale, we're still deciding. That depends on the workload.
I kind of agree with Stuart. It is a slow process in assessing what we actually need and what resources, crews, vehicles, warehouses. But what is lacking at the moment, which will come along, is the institutional information about postponed shows or shows that have been extended, when they are going to return. And so far, we don't have a lot of definites. So it's kind of, you can plan vaguely, but not in fine detail. But again, kind of July and August looks like it's going to start picking up, but we don't know by how much. So it is a bit of, just feeling the water, really, as Stuart says, and assessing it and bringing back crews who will be glad to come back to work because they want to do something, really. So yeah, it'll be interesting in the next few weeks, I think.
I think just to add to that as well, I think we are lucky with the UK government furlough scheme that it is immediate. So as demand picks up, we can phone drivers, we can phone technicians now and say start work tomorrow. We don't need to have a delayed period. We can get the guys back as we need to. So the right approach to start with is getting the right level set initially, and then building on that as time goes by based on the museum programs.
I think that's what we found with our staff. We've got some furlough crews. They're in touch with us every other day saying, when are we coming back? Do we know what the timeline is and things like that? We have had some notification for some institutions, and they have indicated to us some shows were ending at the end of July. They're actually postponed until September. And we're already working on recosting. What we're actually finding, though, in the budgets we've given to those museums is that when they're utilising air freight specifically, the cost of that air freight has doubled from the time that we gave them the initial estimate. And airlines, when we're getting cost off airlines at the moment, where predominantly they were planning on giving you a price and it was good for 30 days. What they're saying now is they'll give you a guide, but you're actually being advised that when you come to book it, will be a spot rate. And that's something that's out of control of all of us. I think, especially if we've already given clients a cost of freight and shipment, wherever it is in the world, there's a lack of capacity on the airlines, where if you take Virgin, we was having 7 flights a day to New York. At the moment, we're down to 2 flights a day. So, space is of a premium, and, operators are taking advantage of that, and the prices are doubling. It's just, the economy of scale. There's only so much capacity. So it's a seller's market. That's what we're really the issue.
Yeah, I think Dave's right. I think again, relating it back to Brexit, sorry, I do apologise, but very similarly to the run up to the Brexit deadlines, it's all a case of maybe slight common sense and also communication. If you know that there's a there's going to be a delay, there's going to be a rush on to get things out, if things don't need to move essentially at that period of time, maybe there could be communication, a slight flexibility around whether that object needs to travel at that given time, knowing that you may face a delay, whether that's there's a delay because there are more export licenses having to be approved, whether there's delays at customs, delays at Eurotunnel, delays at the airport, and as a result, also because there's a lack of other available services, you'll pay a premium in air freight, you'll pay a premium in any air tickets. Not that anyone will necessarily want to travel as a passenger right now anyway, but you know, perhaps if there is a rush on to get something done because the shutters have lifted, people will find more delays and more costs. Whereas over a certain period of time, and who knows what that period of time will be, you have to imagine that aviation, which is extremely competitive, even more competitive than the art logistics transport industry, will actually probably start to redevelop and come back. And those routings, like David was saying, all of a sudden 2 will turn to 5, will turn back to 7 again. After a certain amount of time, Delta will start flying again, American will start flying again. So, you know, there's lots of horror stories around, and people in the press saying, you know, 50% on the airfares and this, that, and the other. I think those are headline-grabbing short-term measures, to be honest with you. I think after a while, yes, the airlines need to recoup, but it's you know, in order for them to keep trading, I don't think they will be able to maintain that kind of price rise for too long.
Hi, David. It's David Preston. Yeah, I mean, Ben touches on some really important points there with regards to air freight rates, but one of the things we've not really touched upon is those registrars from the commercial part of the sector. And I think that we talk about bringing people back from furlough to come to museums. I think every one of the businesses in this Zoom call now, you know, have got some exposure to the commercial market, some more than others, but that's the market which is extremely challenging at the moment as well, which we don't know when it's going to restart. And so when we look at our own capacity, you know, when that shutter's lifted, what's going to be the demand in that sector as well? You know, we all operate on a model which is very competitive, and margins aren't very large. So, you know, when we put resources in, we counter in that we may get some commercial gallery business in part of that day, and there's a bit of give and take within what we do on a day-to-day basis. So our businesses are quite complex in that way. And then we also talk about installation projects, and I know we've got some decamp projects which are just waiting for us to give the go-ahead for those to kick off again. And that's a manpower. You know, that's all about technician utilization rather than vehicles. So I think it's I think every one of our businesses in this call have got different challenges in different sectors of the market, and there's so many things to consider before we start bringing people in off furlough. And the great unknowns, I think, is probably the point I'm making there.
I think my sense from the museum sector, I suppose, is that dates are starting to settle now. So in terms of the objects that have been in shuttered exhibitions, and people are starting to return, particularly in Europe, and start to restart operations, then we are going to get some dates fairly soon about when things will come back, because obviously those institutions are also keen to get the loan objects off their insurance liability, basically. And similarly, further down the line, I think we're starting to see rescheduled programs really start to settle down and firm up. So I think we will see it become clearer fairly soon, if that's reassurance. I'd like to move on to the next bit, I suppose, which is the and again we touched a bit on this as well about the measures for the crews, but also and we also all have a sense of this in the sector, is that we want to be responsible about this too. So this is the interaction, I suppose, between museum teams and the transport teams making deliveries and collections. So on that sense, how are you dealing with the different strategies in different parts of the UK, or the likely diverging strategies in different parts of the UK for easing the restrictions? So for example, if you're going back to things are easing up in England, but obviously Scotland's still much stricter about it. And the second part of that question is, you were talking about risk assessments for your own crews. Would you expect to see reciprocal risk assessments undertaken by the museum teams?
I think it's absolutely paramount that when you're sending a transport crew into a museum, that actually you have a forewarning of the measures that are put in place by different locations. You know, as I said earlier, risk assessments are everything. And, you know, it's easy to do a generic risk assessment, But, you know, as an industry, and certainly, you know, as art transporters, we predominantly go to the same venues time and time again. So there's a lot of knowledge there from experienced staff working at all the agents present, you know, and we know what the locations are like, and then we can look at the risk assessments and to see if they correlate with our knowledge of it. How does that compare with our risk assessments? And I think you can make a decision on a like-for-like basis with your own risk assessments to get a guide to that. You know, we intend to be in contact with all the locations we're delivering or collecting through to find out exactly what their arrangements are. And I think we have to make a decision based on that information. You know, we are totally transparent on what we're happy to release to our clients and partners alike. You know, we want them to be assured that MTec really have gone into this deeply. We've invested more than £10,000 in mitigation measures within our offices, our warehouse and our vehicles. You know, as I said earlier, we've got these vaporization pieces of kit. We're happy for anyone to have that information. And, you know, obviously we'll assist them with our own NEBOSH staff if that's appropriate and when they want that assistance. I think, you know, it's a joint partnership. Although, you know, we're all competitors in the field, I think in the case of this, which is a public safety issue, I think we all need to work together to try and get a common ground and a common set of requirements that we would like to see in order to send our staff and our teams into these locations. And I think that those locations want to be saying to their vendors and their service providers, you know, what mitigation, and then we can all go together. It's not a case of competition or costs. These are going to be, you know, what is the new requirement, and I think it's to us, you know, we have to work together in order to get that level. I think that's the most important thing at the moment in order to be positive and restart our businesses and the industry that, you know, we've worked in for a considerable length of time.
Yeah, I think Dave's really right in saying that we need reciprocal assessments from institutes, whether they have a one-way system operating, you know, which lots of, well, I went further north yesterday and stopped in a few motorway services, which are interesting how they're run. I don't know if anybody has, but they have one-way systems and are basically pretty much open with very few people, but they manage to work. So would an institute have a one-way system? So if a vehicle's in there, no other people might be in the loading bay. If they are, there's an in and out door. How many doors in a loading bay? It's a difficult one. So I think Dave's right in knowing what those facilities are like and areas, and then assessing and seeing if what is said is right. But I think we're going to have to come up with, well, not come up, but expect when we go to make a delivery or arrange a delivery, just as a matter of course, say, can we have your risk assessment for this delivery? COVID risk assessment. It will probably become a norm, as with, you know, any health and safety risk assessment on site.
Yeah, agreed, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to that, I mean, this whole situation, I think, will lead into what needs to happen, which is a lot more communication amongst the transport agents and our clients, more flexibility across the board, and more trust to some extent. To trust that we know what we're doing, we trust that the museums have done their part of it, and we've communicated that around to everyone. I mean, those three things for me are going to be key throughout this whole affair: is communication, flexibility, and trust.
I think it will become the new standard. You know, that everyone will expect that, certainly from us, from transport providers, but, you know, and across the board of institutions, whether it's a commercial gallery or a museum, you know, that'll have to be there, you know, and it will almost become, you know, part of your website, what your COVID-19 status is regarding risk assessment. You know, is it safe to go there? And it'll almost be a sort of normal thing to do every day before you make that delivery.
It'll probably become a caveat to everybody's facilities reports, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think
that is something we're thinking about. Yeah.
I think it's is it right in that it has to be put onto your website? Is that right? Your
You're
corporate
right,
risk
Ben.
assessment.
Yeah, we're going to be publishing our safety procedures on Monday. I just want to kind of go back to a few comments in the last few minutes. I think it's clear that everyone on this call has really considered what's required as far as safety of ourselves, our clients, and the general population. And I probably want to ask this question of David Packer. I know we are, and I'm 100% sure everyone else is. We're happy to be involved in any background work, help that we can provide to any of the UKRG members to help them with their own processes and procedures. Is there anything you guys are doing as UKRG to help smaller regional museums in this area?
I must admit, I was waiting to for this conversation basically until I wrote the procedures for my own institution for receiving shipments, because I've seen published for us, and obviously we're part of a broader organisation, which is the university, showing what the possible phased reopening will be for various buildings across the whole of the state. My assessment was that we would see potentially deliveries of artwork quite early, at an early phase in that reopening process. So we'll need to have those things in place. I'm more than happy to share that widely if it is accepted at my own institution. And yes, it probably will encompass things like a one-way system or single access point, in fact, which is already in place for anybody who needs to go to the site, other than the skeleton security and maintenance team at the moment. In parallel, though, people will be writing the risk assessments that have to be done for reopening to the public further down the line. And actually, it's at base, it's the same thing. You have to demonstrate that we've taken this seriously, and we have to instill confidence in people that they can come to the site and feel safe to do that. So it is running through all of those documents and all of those protocols will be the same principle, the same sense, or the same intention, really, which is to make sure that we act responsibly and we think this all through. But yeah, very gladly I'll offer help to do that if they want to come to us. And I think this is something that's going to come out of this conversation and the response to it. So yeah, your help on that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, we're very happy to upload our documents to the secure UKRG website if there is a place for that to go. I'm sure if we put all of ours together, there would be lots of information there for people to pick from.
Yeah, I agree to that, definitely.
Thank you very much. I suppose that moving on to the next question, actually the two next questions can be rolled together a bit, which is what do you think will be the lasting changes to working practices as a result of the current circumstances? And one example might be collection and delivery paperwork. So that was something that will have to be considered in a collection and delivery risk assessment protocol. Do you think lasting changes around electronic documentation could come into force, or what else do you think might come in terms of your workforce, in terms of your running of vehicles, of your operations at the airports, and so on?
I think personally it's probably going to go electronic totally. I mean, we've been looking at, before the COVID thing, we've been looking at the PDA scenario, similar to a parcel carrier type of operation. But obviously with COVID-19, that has its own risks. And, you could have your PDA on the delivery point, and then actually, rather than asking someone to give you a proof of delivery, i.e. a signature, the receiving location would have their own similar electronic, whether it's an iPad or whatever it is, and the driver pings over the PDF, or the coordinator in the office pings over the PDF of the delivery note, and it will just be an automatic signature, some sort of Adobe sign operation, something like that. And I can see that moving forward. The biggest issue that we see, we have quite an extensive international road freight operation in Europe. We've got locations, our own locations in Europe. It's those CMR delivery notes that the drivers carry with them. You know, where are they stored in the cab? You know, does the other end, even in our own facility, do we actually want to take those off them? It's a regulatory thing to require to have the paper, the lettre de voiture, CMR. But do you want it at the other end? I don't think you do, and I think that's where it's going to be some sort of photo capture idea. You know, just even to keep your own stock control going. You know, we're trying to go paperless in our warehousing totally, which is a very difficult operation when you've got things coming in quickly, especially from your own vehicles, and you're using, you know, paperwork logging in, and then they're uploaded on by barcode onto the system. But, you know, we want to get rid of that paperwork as well. And that's, we're going to have to be a bit more innovative as an industry to get away from this paper, because traditionally, you know, it's your POD. You know, did you receive that artwork? You know, we can't find it. Where is it? Where's your paperwork? If you got a signature from the client, then that's proof of delivery. And that's hard to counter against. Whereas a digital version of that, you know, has that got the same basis, not necessarily in law, but in recognition that, you know, someone has received something, but they can't just find it in their own facility. I think that's something that really needs to be addressed, and I think that's going to take everyone to come up with some sort of standard acknowledged by people in the industry. You know, I think it is business critical.
Yeah, I think Dave's spot on again, because again, just mentioned Brexit for the third and last time. You know, this was one of the points about digitizing notes, customs paperwork, and everything else leading up to a potential cliff edge Brexit. If we didn't know what was going to happen, whether we were going to need to issue customs paperwork or not, if we were going to be a third party country at that stage, because no one still knows at that point. Everyone was talking then about, you know, to museums especially, you know, keep hold of your paperwork. Agents have to keep hold of their CMRs. And we were looking at digitization at that point. Anyway, I think across the board, every single company. So yeah, this is another avenue into that via this virus, because I think digitization is the key, and more use of IT.
Yeah, I agree. It's the way we're all moving anyway. It's just whether the institutes, you know, whether they will, what they're going to accept, what clients are going to accept. There needs to be some kind of standardization. You know, will you accept a digital photograph of something in situ in somebody's loading bay? You know, which is what door-to-door deliveries are doing at the moment. They'll take a photograph and prove that it was delivered outside your door at a certain particular time. It's got a timestamp and a location, which in theory is better than a wet signature, really, isn't it? So I think it's the way we're moving anyway.
I think actually, again, the interaction with institutions is going to be quite critical, so that in this period of time, then I suppose we've rapidly had to adopt quite a few new platforms and packages to make this work, and that some of the electronic signature software that's available, that is being rolled out in my institution and elsewhere, it is something that could play a role there. Would actually satisfy that chain of safeguarding, I suppose, from start to finish of a shipment.
I think if we're looking from a procedural point of view, and you know, we're talking about going back to work in, you know, moving museum objects in just a few weeks, and the reality is there's going to be no electronic signatures in place by then. So I think Ivan makes a good point about photographic evidence. I've been here in the facility receiving vehicles in, and I know I've not been swapping pens, for example. It's the smallest of things, but I think there's got to be a lot of common sense being applied to what we do. You know, we'd love to have the magic wand and say that we're going to be able to implement all this change in such a short space of time. But, you know, we look at how a museum might operate, and it's not just going to be fine art agents they're receiving goods from. They're going to be receiving goods from publishers and, you know, food. It could be the whole supply chain. So I think a common process has to be in place, no matter whoever turns up to the loading bay door to a museum.
What do you think is going to be the issue around scheduling, I suppose, for the next 6 months as well? We were talking a bit earlier on about the speed of activation and the capacity of everybody in meeting the need. But do you think that your scheduling tools or approaches are going to change? Because if the virus is likely to be around for and a continuing feature in our lives for quite some time to come.
Well, I'm not sure we're going to be able to use traffic as an excuse of late. But yeah, I think early conversations are critical in all this, because at the moment everything's being postponed, delayed, cancelled, and the diary, what was originally booked, is is almost null and void. So I think it's important that the members have early contact with their transport companies to start, so we can start modelling what our own resource looks like and getting those people back in on furlough.
Yeah,
sorry.
I mean, agree, and I said it again earlier. It's that early communication and it's flexibility from our clients, that everyone may want something straight away, but we need to be cautious in the resource that we have available. So flexibility across the board would be appreciated from our clients, with obviously the understanding that everyone has their priorities, but we just need to be pragmatic and communicate and flexible.
To wrap up on the final question, I think somebody mentioned Brexit earlier, perhaps, and I'm just wondering whether, and you don't have to be drawn on this, of course, what quickly are people's views on, I suppose, the next approaching deadline and where we might be positioned now in terms of preparation?
Well, weren't we meant to be somewhere in June?
Apparently, allegedly.
With negotiations.
Allegedly, yeah.
And from listening to the media and ministers who are negotiating, who I think they've both got COVID, haven't they? Bernier.
Yes.
So by December, we're not going to have a deal. It's probably best to think that. And so, yeah, what happens then? Yeah, good point.
Would you be, do we feel confident at the moment about the stage of preparedness for HMRC, for example, in that scenario?
I think the systems are prepared. I think they've had 4 years, really to prepare. And every time we've had discussions with HMRC or, the DFT or FDA or any of these organisations, associations, I think they're set up. I mean, HMRC were able to change the customs chief program halfway through, almost up until, I think it was the 1st of March, and we were meant to Brexit on March 17th or something originally. So I think the systems in place are more than able to operate. The issue again is purely down to potential delay if everyone rushes to do something all at once.
I agree with that, definitely. I mean, if you look at the way HMRC turned around the furlough scheme, pretty quick, in my opinion.
Very, yeah.
And also to get the payments over to furloughed staff, or to companies to pay, for paying furloughed staff in 6 days. That's unprecedented. I've been in business 30 years and I can't remember such a speedy action from the government and HMRC. I don't think we want to underestimate the efficacy of HMRC themselves. I think things will be in place. I decided to start our Belgium operation the day after the Brexit vote because I wanted to mitigate any risks for my business, potentially because of the B word. And I was bereft like many people were. I see myself as Europe. In fact, I live in Belgium, although I'm in the UK at the moment. Actually, I think it would go a lot smoother than we anticipate. I think we've had some time, considerable time to make things work. I think we've got to be positive about it. I initially was very negative about Brexit. However, now I feel very positive about it. I think it's for the UK and the European countries as well. I think they recognise that we need to make an effort to get this done. COVID has only made that more possible, in my opinion, because, you know, although there's been lots in the press about the European countries, and if the UK is a third party, have been very, you know, separated, disjointed in their management of the COVID thing. I think it's a lesson that probably is going to be learned, that we need to get on with it now. COVID is much worse than we could ever imagine than Brexit. And I think we'll get over the bump. You know, we need to just get on with it, and we need to trust the government. I think, you know, there was an amount of distrust of the government and their organisational skills going into the COVID. And I think, yeah, for whatever you think about their reactions initially, I mean, they've turned round and saved our businesses, you know, for one. And, you know, they've helped all our employees and most of the businesses in the UK very well. And, you know, I think we need to look at the Brexit in the same vein. You know, we've got a place in Antwerp. We, you know, potentially, the worst comes to the worst, where we've got issues with paperwork, especially customs paperwork. Well, maybe we can load trailers. The courier can go on the ferry. The trailer can go unaccompanied, and our vehicles can pick up the trailers the other side, you know, and we can clear on wheels in somewhere like Antwerp or any other location in Europe. I think that's how we've got to look at it, as a worst case scenario. It's not ideal for anyone, but we'll make it work. You know, I think our businesses that are represented here today, you know, are testament to the fact that no matter what the problems we are faced, we will find a way of getting over it. You know, any bump, we'll get over it. And I can speak for all you guys that are on this call. You're all the same mindset. We will make it work. You know, but
I think everybody has a will as well. I think between the institutions, there's a will to carry on doing the cultural exchange. So, like you say, if there will be a path through it. I think we'll wrap up. We've had a really good run. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and for all of your inputs today. It's been great. So everybody watching, please keep in touch to the UKRG website and through the Twitter feed. Thanks again, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, David.
Take care.
Thanks, David. Thanks.